Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Zach on Sports. I'm your host, Zach Gershman. With me today is ESPN's own Tom Rinaldi. Tom, welcome to Zach on Sports.
Thanks for having me, Zach. Looking forward to it.
I'm very much looking forward to this one, and let's get right into it. Tom, you are a true storyteller, and your features are always very powerful and inspiring. There's always a deep message behind your stories, behind your features. When you set a subject and you decide this is the story I'm going to do, what allows you to connect with the subject?
I think it's as obvious as it may sound, Zach. It's based on sort of three things as I head in to try to tell anybody's story. A sort of my trinity, my set of North Stars. The first is accuracy. Because, Zach, if I tell your story, and even if you think I've captured the spirit or I've done so many things to convey your message, if there's a factual mistake, what do you think the very first takeaway will be for Zach? It'll be, listen, Tom liked it, but I'm actually 19. I'm not 18, or whatever that mistake might be. So accuracy. The next one is empathy. And that's to really have a genuine care and concern for what the subject is going to share, and hopefully to convey that in an authentic way, right? And the third one is curiosity, to have a genuine interest in the contours and shapes and twists and turns of whatever portion of life the subject is going to share with you. So to me, accuracy, empathy, and curiosity are really important drivers that, and it took me way too long to sort of come up with those as my three guides, but I try to honor those best I can.
So what allows you to connect so emotionally with the subject? Because a lot of people that you've interviewed, your packages, as I already mentioned, were very powerful. They obviously feel that connection and that willingness to open up. So what allows you to connect emotionally with them?
I think, Zach, it's if the subject feels, again, there's an authentic empathy in place, but also, again, I've had to learn the hard way, not to get in the way. And that means to listen and to follow up, as well as to have the patience to let a moment fully unfold. If you and I are having a conversation at a restaurant and you come to a moment where perhaps you don't know what more to say, the social impulse that we've each been taught is to jump in, to bail you out, to guess how you might feel, what you might say. An interview is not a conversation. So in an interview setting where there's a camera, the camera, that lens is a void, and it's being filled all the time, every moment and instant, by the subject, by what the subject is emoting or showing or hiding or feeling or whatever it may be. So if you get to a moment of sharing and then you stop, even though it's awkward socially, waiting for you to continue.
Wow.
And that can feel very anxious and it can feel very difficult in the moment. But many times, Zach, the most powerful parts of an interview follow that pause. Not all the time, but at times.
You are a part of one of the many things you're a part of at ESPN. You're a part of College GameDay. I got my College GameDay hard hat over here that I got from the Penn State Whiteout this past year.
Yep.
Incredible experience. And the crew looks like they have such a tight connection with each other. What is your relationship like with the crew? And what do you think allows the crew to be so successful? And what do you think makes College GameDay so successful?
Well, I think that, first of all, we have the entire country as a canvas. And I would say we have the most impassioned sport as our subject, right? The sporting base is so invested, and the energy and passion of college students that form the Greek chorus to the show. They are its heart and its pulse. And within that, we are, if you will, the traveling circus that goes from campus to campus. And in those travels and in all that time spent planning and preparing and hopefully solving problems and presenting something come Saturday morning, there are real bonds of true connection, listening to one another, understanding one another, challenging one another on what the best content and approach would be for a given segment or a given subject. And it's just been an awesome privilege to be a part of that show now for more than a decade and a half, and have the chance to visit incredible places like the Valley and so many of the other campuses we've had the opportunity to visit. It is as fun as we hope it looks on TV.
Oh, it was a blast. Getting there for me, I got there at 2 a.m, camped outside, and I had to work the football game anyway. I was exhausted,
Wow.
but College Game Day is unlike any other. And as a student, you never know when College Game Day is going to come back to your campus. So it's an experience I had to take part in. But you mentioned that it's when the entire country turns on College Game Day. That's when everyone really knows it's college football time. When a couple of months ago, the entire country turned on the Dallas Mavericks versus Denver Nuggets game, when the news broke that the NBA season was going to be put on pause due to COVID-19. We had Ryan Rucco on ZachOnSports a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, what a terrific job, Zach, he did in such a difficult spot of having to chronicle the game and yet place the game in its appropriate place within not only the sport, but when you think, Zach, of how important a threshold that was to cross for the entire nation in its awareness and its reaction to COVID-19. I really do think that the NBA suspension of the season was one of those key thresholds to cross in how the nation viewed COVID.
Of course.
I did.
And when you had the opportunity to interview Mark Cuban, his reaction was shown on TV, him falling back in his chair, absolutely shocked. When you were interviewing Mark Cuban as the story's developing, did you understand the magnitude of what this really meant for the United States and what was actually happening around the sport?
I don't think that I did, Zach, but I can tell you this, just within the absolute microcosm of an NBA game or a live sporting event, I don't think I will ever do another in-game, in-event interview of that length where there's no attempt made at all to document the unfolding action.
Yep.
Baskets were scored, and I think at one point I acknowledged the basket being scored. There were points being put up on the board that we made no mention of. We did box and box, but at other times we took Cuban full. Obviously, he's maybe the highest profile owner in the sport, and we needed to hear a voice of ownership in that moment, and we were fortunate that Cuban said yes. And I think a lot of what he had to say was remarkably on point, given the suddenness of what was unfolding.
Exactly. And he touched on how he was going to honor his workers. He was going to help them out.
Wasn't that remarkable in the moment that quickly to say, we're going to have a fun, we want to take care of our employees? That was remarkable.
And as you said, it kind of set the standard for the owners across all the different leagues, what they should do with their employers, with their workers. So going from one memorable moment to another memorable moment, College Game Day went to Blacksburg, West Virginia. Virginia Tech, went to Virginia Tech following the Virginia Tech shooting on campus. Can you describe your preparation, knowing what had transpired in Virginia Tech and what it was going to mean to the community?
I'm amazed, Zach, that of all the visits and all that we've made, all the shows that we've done, you point to that. And I don't know if this is a byproduct of research that you've done, but for me, Zach, that's a show that will forever resonate, because it really was an opportunity for a sporting event to present a step forward, an exercise in unity and healing for such an absolute tragedy to have occurred that ripped into the heart of a community and a campus. And I'll never forget the spirit that we felt as a show, and then as the game ultimately played out. That was and I had the opportunity to do a feature involving a survivor of the shooting. And at College Game Day, for those who haven't been, we have large screens that show the features to the assembled crowd. You could hear a pin drop of the thousands who came to watch the show, seeing one of their own story told about how difficult that day was. That's a show that will forever resonate with me, Zach.
So what's that like for you when you're standing on the side, you're watching the piece on the giant screen, you knowing you're narrating the story, you're helping convey the story to the audience, and it's pitch silent? What's that like for you personally?
It's an anxious time, to tell you the truth. And oftentimes it's an emotional time. I know that I struggled in the tag of that piece, and I had to serve as the transition, I think, to get us to break, because after break, when the show returned, we were broadcasting from inside the stadium. So the reason the feature was placed where it was to give the guys on the set the opportunity to move from outside to inside. So there was some moving pieces production wise, but I also remember the producer, who's now gone on to head all of football for ESPN, Lee Fitting. I remember he turned away from the screen at one point in the truck because he was choking up and he wanted to remain composed. And I think that's a reflection of Lee's great heart, but I'd like to think it's a reflection of our collective feeling and passion for the students and the players and the campuses and the sport itself that we have the opportunity to cover.
As I said with the first question, it's incredibly powerful, very inspiring stories. But speaking of inspiring story, we're going to go right into Beyond the Mic, which is a segment on Zach on Sports where we get to know Tom Rinaldi, the person. Are you ready for it?
Yes.
All right, let's do it. So tell us a little bit about your journey going from the University of Pennsylvania to Shadyside High School, teaching there, to now ESPN.
So I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, where you are, and a place I'm sure you know well. Yes. I was a high school teacher and a coach, Zach, for a couple of years it was my first job out of college. I loved it. Shadyside Academy in Pittsburgh. I coached basketball and I coached soccer, and I taught English and drama and short story and writing and freshman English and things like that. Fantastic school and a great experience. And then I went and made a pivot out of that, Zach. I went from doing that to a public high school in the South Bronx in New York City through Teach for America. And I was in the charter class, the inaugural very first class of Teach for America. And then I taught for a few years in the South Bronx, and a very, very different experience with high school education in our country, where there were so many opportunities and advantages for those at Shadyside, and there were so many challenges presented to so many of the students who were phenomenal at Morris High School in the South Bronx. I did that for a number of years. Ultimately, I went back to school for journalism. That was 1 year. I did that in the city at Columbia, and then the journey started, which ultimately led to ESPN as a news reporter initially, who made his way to sports.
That's an inspiring, incredible story, how you were part of the inaugural class. That's amazing. But New York, you wrote a book called The Red Bandana that speaks about heroism at its core regarding 9/11, the attacks during the 9/11 terrorist attacks. You wrote a story about that, about the Red Bandana, about Wells Crowther. What has that story meant to you personally, and what inspired you to write that book?
So we were able to first present the story as an ESPN television feature, and the producer of the story was a classmate of Wells at Boston College, told in miniature, Zach. This is a story that nearly 3,000 people, 2,977 people died in the terrorist attacks, and Wells Crowther was one. And we told the story of the heroism he showed that day, a former Boston College lacrosse player who worked on the 104th floor of the South Tower. And when that tower, before it had collapsed, but after it had been hit by Flight 175 out of Boston, he led two groups of people from the 79th floor sky lobby ultimately down, and only to lose his life when the tower collapsed. It's a story, Zach, which I think at its core presents a question. What would you do in the last hour of your life? Wells didn't know it was the last hour, but he did know it could be. And he still made that choice. The choice to put others before himself, to risk his life to help people whose names he didn't even know. People of different creeds, different genders, strangers who had no connection to him. And he saved a number of people before losing his own life. And so I ask myself, what would I have done? What would I do? God forbid that I was placed in that spot. And I don't think I could do it. So within that, I found an example and an instructive lesson in selflessness and sacrifice that I really thought people could benefit from beyond the ESPN feature. And so I treated it more largely in a book, which we've been very lucky has found a home in schools and made the Times bestseller list and has had some success, which is fantastic. Meaning that anything that spreads that story, I think is, I know I'm thrilled to have been a very small part of being able to spread Wells' legacy.
And is it true, a part of spreading his legacy, you carry around a red bandana with you majority of the time at least?
I do. I sit there up in the drawer in the house right now, and while I have sweatpants on right now, so I don't have a handkerchief with me. When I do, if I wear a suit or I'm out on assignment, most times I do. I have it in my pocket. That's great research, Zach.
That's special, though. That's special, though, to be a part of that, wanting to spread his message just by having it in your pocket. You can't always carry a book in your pocket, but you could always carry something as small as a bandana. So we're going to wrap up this episode here. We're going to go into a quick rapid fire, 3 quick questions here. Tom, what was your favorite college bar during the College GameDay bar crawl?
Wow. So I'm not much of a drinker, Zach, and I didn't drink anything, obviously, while doing the story. But I want to say my favorite bar was Professor Tom's, which is the Michigan bar that we went to. And for those who didn't see it, we tried to let people know that New York City, even though it does not have a football power, in a way it has all of them. Manhattan does, because of these alumni groups that go to watch their alma mater play on Saturdays. We had a wonderful time doing the story, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Best College GameDay sign you've seen. What's your favorite one?
So this is a crazy, crazy sign. Some of my favorite signs have been the non sequitur signs that seem to come out of nowhere, but here's the few of them. In the midst of an election cycle, I'd like to remember which one, I don't know. We were at South Carolina and they were playing Georgia, and somebody held up a sign which said, Mark Richt, who was at the time the head coach of Georgia, Mark Richt hates the middle class.
Wow.
That was just so random.
Wow.
Another one that was held up just simply said, Tebow loved me long time. And a third one that became somewhat famous, at least within our circles, because there was a discussion when we saw the sign about whether it was somehow inappropriate or not. There was someone who held a sign which said, I'm Asian.
Just as simple as that.
It. I'm Asian, with an arrow pointed down.
Was he?
And yes.
Okay.
And so for several weeks in a row, other Asian fans of the show held up a sign which just said, I'm Asian. And
wow.
So that's those are a few of my favorite signs. I could give you 100 that have just been phenomenal.
That is absolutely crazy. But final question here. I had to phrase it differently, and I'll explain it in a second, but who's the better Georgia athlete, David Pollock or Maria Taylor?
Oh, my goodness. I'm sorry, but there's no way I can determine a clear winner there. Because Here you have Pollock, 3-time All-American, first-round NFL draft choice. A lot of people don't know he was recruited and brought to Georgia to play offense. He was such a tremendous athlete that he transitioned to play defense. But Maria, multi-sport threat. Mm-hmm. So that brings a whole different dynamic to it, right? I mean, listen, Pollock was awesome, but he was awesome at one thing. Maria's great at many things. There's no way I could declare a winner there. Oh, here's what I can say with clarity, Zach. Both infinitely better than me as an athlete.
Even as a basketball and soccer coach?
Yes, much better.
All right. I would have added Desmond Howard and Kirk Herbstreit to the list. Those are Big Ten guys. Unless they want to come on Zach on Sports, which I would love if they did. Maria Taylor, David Pollock, bring them all on. We have the helmet here. We're ready to go.
Okay, we'll do.
But it is what it is. I guess that's what the cool kids say now. It is what it is. Tom, thank you so much for being on Zach on Sports. Absolutely loved this episode. I hope you enjoyed being on the show as well.
Your research was outstanding, Zach, and I really appreciated the opportunity to be on with you.
I appreciate it beyond words. Thank you so much. For everybody else, I'll see you guys next time on Zach on Sports.